At my parents' Thanksgiving dinner, my mother served everyone champagne but handed me tap water. "You always spill everything," she snorted. I raised my glass anyway. To new beginnings. My fiancé walked in and said, starting with our Paris wedding fully funded by me. Last Thanksgiving at my parents' house, my mother made it painfully obvious I wasn't welcome. She handed champagne to everyone at the table, and gave me tap water, laughing that I always spill everything. I raised my glass anyway and toasted to new beginnings. Right then, my fiancé Wesley walked in with huge news. We were getting married in Paris, and he was paying for it all himself. The whole room went silent. And from that moment, everything changed between me and my family. Here's what happened. The room smelled like roasted turkey, cloves, and just the faintest whiff of bleach. My mother had been scrubbing the house for days, like a clean home could somehow make our family less broken. I was already regretting coming. I was sitting there at the long oak dining table, watching as my mother floated around, topping off everyone's champagne flutes with an exaggerated flourish. Wesley wasn't there yet. He had gotten delayed trying to wrap up a project call. When she got to my seat, she dropped a plain glass of water down in front of me with a loud thunk. "You always spill everything," she said, smiling like she was telling an inside joke at my expense. The room chuckled nervously. Vivian glanced at me from across the table, her perfect hair catching the light. Her husband Marcus stared at his plate. I smiled tightly, picked up my glass of water, and raised it high. "To new beginnings," I said, loud enough that even the kids at the far end of the table turned to look. Before the awkward silence could stretch too long, the front door creaked open. Wesley walked in, brushing snowflakes off his dark coat. Without missing a beat, he crossed the room and said warmly, "Starting with our Paris wedding fully funded by me." The words hung in the air like fireworks that hadn't gone off yet. For a second, no one moved. Then my mother's mouth twisted like she'd bitten into a lemon. My father blinked hard, like he wasn't sure he heard right. Vivian actually gasped, her fork clattering onto her plate. I stood up, heart hammering against my ribs. "Yes," I said, meeting everyone's eyes one by one. "We're getting married in Paris. In the spring." Vivian recovered first, smiling a little too brightly. "Wow, Paris. That's ambitious." Wesley moved to stand beside me, slipping his hand into mine casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world. He squeezed once, grounding me. My mother didn't say anything. She just smiled, that tight, strained smile she wore at funerals. The rest of the dinner was a strange, stilted affair. Conversation sputtered out every few minutes, only to be revived by my father asking Wesley about his work, or Marcus trying to steer the talk back to football scores. The kids fought over dessert at the far end of the table. My mother kept refilling her champagne glass a little too frequently. I just sat there, feeling oddly calm. Like I was watching the last scenes of a play I never wanted to be in. After dinner, people started trickling out. Coats were gathered, kisses were exchanged, and cars crunched down the icy driveway. Wesley offered to help with dishes, but my mother waved him off with a sharp little shake of her head. "I'll talk to Scarlett," she said, too sweetly. I followed her into the kitchen, heart pounding. She was scrubbing a pan with so much force I thought it might shatter. "You'll regret this," she said, not looking at me. Her voice was low and mean, the way it got when she thought no one was listening. "Maybe," I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. "But it'll be my mistake to make." She turned then, wet hands clenched into fists. For a moment, I thought she might actually hit me. Instead, she just sniffed, tossed the pan into the sink, and walked away. I stood there, staring at the dirty water swirling down the drain. There wasn't going to be a tearful reconciliation. No dramatic apology. Just the same coldness, the same bitterness she had always offered me. I didn't follow her. I didn't say goodbye. Wesley and I drove to the Little Inn we'd booked, a cozy place with creaky floors and threadbare quilts that somehow felt more like home than the house I'd grown up in. We sat by the fire, sipping hot cider, and started planning out the rest of the wedding details. He had already spoken with a planner in Paris. He had ideas for little bistro tables at the reception, live music by the river, simple linen dresses instead of stiff gowns. Every word out of his mouth was a reminder that the life we were building was ours, not something cobbled together from my family's brittle expectations. 2 days later, a card arrived at my apartment in Brooklyn. No return address. Just a simple note inside. For your new beginnings. Proud of you. It was signed simply, Dad. And tucked inside were 2 crisp $100 bills. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't an apology for years of silence. But it was something. A crack in the wall I thought would stand forever. Wesley and I spent the next few weeks buried in logistics and quiet excitement. The more we planned, the more real it felt, the tiny church near the river, the soft blue-gray invitations, the dinner at a tucked-away Parisian cafe where you could smell the butter from down the street. I didn't tell my mother any of it. Not out of spite, though God knew she probably thought it was, but because it didn't even occur to me. She had made it very clear that this wasn't her celebration. Vivian, of course, found out. One of our cousins posted about the wedding on Facebook, a soft focus photo of the save the date card propped against a mug of coffee. Within a day, my phone started buzzing with messages. Vivian, Paris? Wow. Guess you weren't joking. Vivian, Mom's losing it. Vivian, you really should have told her. She's family. I stared at my phone for a long time. The words felt heavy, like a net trying to pull me back underwater. But I didn't respond. Not immediately, anyway. Instead, I went to Wesley's apartment, where we sat on the floor surrounded by color swatches and tentative guest lists. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly, tapping the save the date card with his thumb. I knew what he meant. Are you sure you can handle it, everything that comes with cutting ties, with standing on your own? I nodded. I'm not building a life based on guilt, I said. Not anymore. We mailed the invitations the next morning. The first real storm hit 3 days later. I got home from work to find a small box propped against my apartment door. No name on the outside. Just a tight scrawl on the side, for Scarlett. Inside was my old scrapbook, one I'd kept from middle school into high school, filled with crumpled ticket stubs, dried flowers, and bad poetry written in glitter pen. Pinned to the front with a piece of tape was a note in my mother's sharp, slanted handwriting, "You used to dream bigger than this." That was it. No love, Mom. No congratulations. Just another little reminder that whatever I did, it would never be enough. I almost laughed. The irony of her sending me something meant to make me feel small, right as I was planning the biggest adventure of my life, wasn't lost on me. I tossed the note in the trash, but I couldn't bring myself to throw out the scrapbook. Some parts of my past deserved to come with me. Others didn't. Vivian called that night. She didn't bother with greetings. She's devastated, Vivian said. She says you're cutting her out of your life. I pinched the bridge of my nose, the old headache forming behind my eyes. I'm inviting people who support me, I said. She's your mother, Vivian snapped, like that alone should excuse everything. You only get one. I thought about the water glass at Thanksgiving. About the years of quiet digs, of backhanded compliments, of always being the problem no matter what I did. You only get one life, I said finally, and hung up. I sat there for a long time, the city lights blinking outside the window, feeling both heavier and lighter than I had in years. Invitations went out. RSVPs trickled back. My father's acceptance card arrived in the mail with a tiny smiley face drawn next to his name, like a small act of rebellion against my mother's bitterness. A few other relatives, my cousin Lila, an old aunt from Vermont, sent back enthusiastic yes. But from my mother? Nothing. No card. No call. Just silence so loud it filled every quiet moment if I let it. I didn't. I filled my time with cake tastings, dress fittings, late-night planning sessions with Wesley where we ended up talking about everything except the wedding, what we wanted for our future, where we might move, what names we liked for someday maybe children. For the first time in my life, I felt like the main character in my own story. 2 weeks before the wedding, just as I was starting to relax, it happened. I got a call from the wedding planner in Paris. She sounded polite, but rattled. "Miss Monroe, I just wanted to double-check you said the guest list was final, correct? No more changes?" "Correct," I said, heart lifting slightly. "Fewer surprises." "Good." There was a call from someone identifying themselves as your mother. She requested several additions to the guest list. I sat bolt upright. "What?" I said sharply. "Who?" She mentioned that it would be more appropriate for some extended family members to be invited. Apparently, she's already spoken to them. The planner paused delicately, clearly used to dealing with family dramas but still uncomfortable. "Of course, we have not made any changes without your authorization." I swallowed, heart hammering. "Thank you," I said tightly. "Please don't add anyone without speaking to me first." After I hung up, I just sat there for a long time, staring at the blank wall across from me. Of course she had found a way to try to control it. Even from 3,000 miles away. Even now. I thought about calling her. Demanding she back off. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized she wasn't going to stop. Not unless I stopped letting her get a reaction. Wesley found me like that when he got home, sitting on the couch, still holding my phone, a cold cup of coffee forgotten on the side table. Without asking, he sat down beside me and took my hand. "Whatever she's trying to do," he said quietly, "it doesn't change a thing." And for the first time, I believed him. Really believed him. We were getting married. In Paris. With or without her blessing. And nothing she did was going to change that. The weeks leading up to the trip blurred together, a mixture of last-minute errands, phone calls across time zones, and late nights where Wesley and I fell asleep in piles of half-packed suitcases. My mother didn't call. She didn't text. She didn't RSVP. The silence was louder than any words she could have thrown at me. I should have been happy. I should have been relieved. But part of me, some traitorous little corner, kept waiting for something. Some last-minute grand gesture, an apology, a meltdown. Something that showed she cared enough to even be angry. But nothing came. The day before our flight, Wesley and I sat in a near-empty airport lounge, watching the snow fall outside. He was reading through some notes on our vendors, highlighting a few in yellow. I was pretending to scroll on my phone, but mostly I was staring into space. "You're quiet," he said without looking up. I shrugged. "I keep thinking about what happens after." Wesley finally looked up, setting down the papers. "After the wedding?" I nodded. I guess part of me always thought she would come around someday. You know? That if I just did enough became enough, she'd finally. I don't know. Choose me. Wesley leaned back in his chair, studying me the way he did when he was trying to figure out a puzzle without forcing the pieces. "And now?" he asked gently. "Now," I said slowly, "I think she already made her choice a long time ago. I just didn't want to believe it." He didn't say anything after that. He just reached across the table and squeezed my hand, the kind of steady pressure that said without words, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." It was enough. The flight to Paris was uneventful. Wesley slept most of the way, head tilted against my shoulder. I watched cheesy romantic movies and tried not to let my mind spiral. When we landed, the city greeted us with a soft, chilly mist and the smell of fresh bread drifting through the air. The streets gleamed from a light rain, and the old buildings stood proud and worn like survivors of 100 storms. Our hotel was a small boutique spot near the Marais, all creaky floors and velvet curtains. The windows overlooked a narrow cobblestone alley where bicycles leaned against crooked lamp posts. It was perfect. Better than perfect. The first night, we walked hand in hand along the Seine, the Eiffel Tower glittering in the distance. I should have been completely lost in the moment. And part of me was. But another part, the part trained by years under my mother's thumb, kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't take long. The next morning, just as we were finishing a breakfast of flaky croissants and thick, rich coffee, my phone buzzed. An email. From Vivian. The subject line simply said, "Just FYI." I opened it and immediately felt the blood drain from my face. Attached were screenshots from a private Facebook group, some kind of extended family chat where my mother had posted a long, seething message about how certain people were selfishly choosing to abandon family and wasting their lives on childish fantasies in Paris. She hadn't named me directly. But she hadn't needed to. Everyone knew. The comments underneath were worse. Cousins I hadn't seen in years chimed in, tooting about modern selfishness and how sad it must be for Marianne to have such an ungrateful daughter. One of my uncles even suggested maybe someone should show up anyway, to remind her where she came from. I stared at the screen, heart hammering. Wesley read over my shoulder, silent. When I finally looked up at him, he just shook his head. "We knew she might try something," he said simply. "Yeah," I said, swallowing hard. "I just didn't think it would hurt this much." I set the phone face down on the table. "I'm not letting her ruin this," I said, voice shaking a little. Wesley didn't say anything. He just reached across and gently wiped a crumb from my cheek with his thumb. "We've got a wedding to plan," he said. And just like that, I remembered, this trip wasn't about them. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about us. The next few days passed in a dreamlike blur. Our planner, Juliette, was a tiny French woman with a fierce bun and a fiercer attitude. She didn't tolerate drama. She kept the vendors moving like a general leading a beloved but unruly army. Our florist met us at the venue, a small sunlit chapel with ivy crawling up the stone walls, and showed us the arrangements: creamy white roses, wild green branches, soft sprigs of lavender tucked here and there like secrets. The baker brought sample cakes to our hotel, delicate towers of lemon sponge and fresh berries so perfect they looked fake. Even the musicians, an older trio who played violins and a cello, showed up early to practice under the towering oak trees that framed the courtyard. It was all happening. It was real. And then, for days before the wedding, Juliet pulled me aside during a final walkthrough of the chapel. "There's been an unexpected request," she said, her English heavily accented but clear. I tensed immediately. "What kind of request?" I asked. Juliet glanced down at her clipboard. "Your mother. She is here. In Paris." My stomach dropped. "She asked for the address of the ceremony," Juliet continued carefully. "Said she would like to speak with you before the wedding day." For a long moment, I just stood there, the world tilting slightly. She was here. In Paris. Somehow, despite all the distance, despite all the silence, she had found a way to insert herself back into the story. I barely heard what Juliet said after that. The words blurred together into a low hum against the high, vaulted ceilings of the chapel. I nodded, barely trusting myself to speak, and excused myself. Wesley found me outside, sitting on a low stone wall in the cold, twisting my engagement ring around and around on my finger. "She's here," I said when he sat down. He didn't ask who. He already knew. "Do you want me to handle it?" he asked quietly. The thing was, part of me did. Part of me wanted to hide behind him, to let someone else finally step into the line of fire for once. But another part, the part that had gotten me this far, knew I couldn't. Not this time. "I'll meet her," I said. Wesley just nodded. No pressure. No judgment. Only trust. We agreed to meet at a cafe near the river, one of those places where the tables are crammed together and the chairs all face the street. It was raining lightly when I got there, a fine mist that coated everything in silver. The inside of the cafe was warm and golden, full of the clink of cups and the soft murmur of French conversations. She was already there, of course. Sitting ramrod straight at a corner table, hands folded neatly on the tablecloth like she was posing for a portrait. She looked the same and different all at once, like a house she used to live in that's been painted a new color. Still familiar. Still foreign. I slid into the seat across from her without speaking. For a few long, brittle moments, neither of us said anything. Then she picked up her coffee cup, took a slow sip, and set it down carefully. "I suppose you think you're very brave," she said finally, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I didn't flinch. Not this time. "I think I'm living my life," I said simply. She scoffed, like I'd said something childish. "Running away to Paris," she said. "Marrying some man who barely knows you. Throwing away your family." I leaned forward slightly, feeling something inside me settle. "I'm not throwing away anything," I said. "I'm choosing myself." The words hung there, heavy between us. She studied me for a long moment, like she didn't recognize me. "You were always so dramatic," she said finally, as if that explained everything. A waiter approached, asked something in French. I shook my head. She waved him off irritably. "You think this little fairy tale you're building is real," she said. "But it won't last. Real life isn't art projects and romantic cities. Real life is dirty and disappointing." I swallowed hard. Maybe, once, that would have broken me. Maybe I would have begged her to believe in me. To see me. But not now. "Maybe," I said. "But even if it falls apart, it'll be mine." She sat back, clearly displeased by my refusal to argue. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice low and urgent. "You'll see." I nodded slowly. "Maybe," I repeated. "But it's my mistake to make." For a moment, just a flicker, I thought I saw something crack in her expression. Something raw. Something like fear? But then she blinked, and the wall slammed back into place. "You'll regret this," she said, standing abruptly and gathering her purse. I didn't stand. I didn't apologize. I just watched her go, the bell over the door jangling sharply as she disappeared into the rain. I sat there for a while after she left, staring out the window. Watching the raindrops race each other down the glass. Some small, stubborn part of me had expected something else. A softening. A change. But people show you who they are. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is believe them. Back at the hotel, Wesley didn't ask how it went. He just pulled me into a hug so tight I thought my ribs might crack, and I let him. I let myself be held. For the first time in a long time, I realized I didn't need her approval. I didn't need her permission. I had everything I needed. And soon, I would be walking down an aisle in a city I loved, toward a man who saw me not the failure, not the screw-up, not the burden. Just me. Scarlett. Enough, exactly as I was. The days leading up to the ceremony were a blur of small, bright moments. Dress fittings, last-minute calls to the caterer, laughing with Wesley in the tiny elevator of our hotel when we got stuck between floors for 5 minutes and thought we'd miss the rehearsal dinner. It felt almost surreal, like I had slipped into someone else's better, softer life. My father arrived 2 days before the wedding, traveling alone. No mother. No Vivian. He greeted me at the hotel with a gruff hug and a quiet, "You look happy, kid." And that was enough. We walked along the Seine that evening, just the two of us, eating greasy paper-wrapped crepes and talking about everything except the obvious, the giant, aching space where half my family should have been. I asked him, finally, why he had come alone. He shrugged, hands buried deep in his coat pockets. "Your mother made her choice," he said simply. I made mine. A lump rose in my throat, sharp and unexpected. Maybe people didn't always change. But sometimes, they surprised you anyway. The morning of the wedding, Paris was bathed in a pale gold light, like the city itself had decided to celebrate with us. My dress was simple, soft ivory silk that caught the light when I moved. No veil. No heavy jewelry. Just a small bouquet of wildflowers gathered that morning from the flower market down the street. Wesley waited for me at the end of the stone courtyard, His suit rumpled in a way that somehow made him look even more perfect. His smile when he saw me wide and open and entirely unguarded nearly undid me. The ceremony was short, sweet, and completely ours. No drama. No unexpected appearances. Just the people who loved us, standing there in the spring air, bearing witness. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the courtyard erupted into cheers, and someone popped a bottle of champagne so hard the cork nearly took out a potted plant. I laughed until I couldn't breathe. At the reception, after the first dance and the first glass of real, sparkling champagne, no water glasses here, I spotted something, or rather, someone lingering at the edge of the square. Vivian. She wasn't dressed for a wedding, jeans, a wrinkled jacket, and she looked deeply out of place among the flowers and fairy lights. For a moment, I froze. Every instinct told me to go to her, to smooth things over, to make it easy. But then I remembered, that was the old Scarlet. The one who bent until she snapped. The one who begged for crumbs. Now? Now I smiled politely and turned away. I let her stand there, watching, as we toasted and laughed and danced without her. I let her see, without saying a word, that the life she and my mother had tried so hard to make me doubt was more beautiful than anything they could tear down. She left after 20 minutes. I didn't chase her. I didn't even think about it. Later, much later, after the cake had been cut and the candles had burned low, Wesley and I slipped away from the party and walked down to the river. The Eiffel Tower was glittering above us, the city humming softly like a living thing. We sat on the old stone steps leading down to the water, my head resting on his shoulder. You know, Wesley said after a long time, I think you got your new beginning after all. I smiled against the fabric of his jacket. Yeah, I said. And the best part is, I didn't need their permission to have it. He laughed quietly. Best revenge there is, he said. I looked out over the water, at the lights dancing across the surface. Living well, choosing happiness, loving fully, that was the revenge. No screaming matches. No slamming doors. No bitter Facebook rants. Just joy. Pure, unapologetic joy. And as I sat there, warm in the Paris night, I realized, this wasn't just a new chapter. It was a whole new book. And I was finally the one writing it.